Good evening and welcome to the first of our installments for Mental Health Awareness Month. This evening we are talking with DG Mindset. He is a father, he is a husband, he is a mindset coach. And I had to look up what that meant because I didn't know what it was originally. I've heard of, all of these other kinds of coaches, but I had to learn about what a mindset coach was. And he is here this evening because we are changing mindsets. We are going to be talking about how to change how we think about our trauma and what it feels like to kind of heal the whole person. So, DG, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So we were talking a little bit before this all started. You said you have an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old. You're in Indianapolis, out there in the Midwest, living it up. But before we get started on all the good content we're about to create, I have to clown you a little bit and kind of geek out on the Harlem Globetrotters.
When you said you were from Harlem, I was like, oh, okay. So then,
You know it's coming. You know it's coming. So what was
yeah,
that experience like?
it was. I got to do it for 8 years, and it was a unique experience because, you know, I went to play basketball from 7 years old all the way up. Played in college, played at the College of New Jersey, and then, I had this dream of wanting to play professional basketball one day, and never did I think that my job for 8 years was going to take me to 70 different countries and have me on the Today Show and Good Morning America and Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? Like, it was an unbelievable experience. And no, I was not smarter than a fifth grader, if you were wondering. But it was an unbelievable experience for sure.
Listen, when you are post graduation by however many years you are, most of us are not smarter than the fifth grader. I think it's kind of like a trick question. They're in it.
Right?
The kids feel good, so I'm always down for stuff like that. I want
Yeah.
to start out with one of my favorite quotes, and that quote is: "The difference between a flower and a weed is a judgment."
Wow, that's good.
And I like that quote because it kind of prefaces what you and I are going to get into this evening. The difference between whether we succeed or fail, whether the difference between whether we get back up from a failure, right, is how we internalize and think about ourselves. And I'll be transparent and perfectly honest, this conversation really does hit home. It hits home because I don't know anybody who doesn't have trauma, but I've experienced my fair share of it. And as I was learning about you and reading about you, just the idea of cradling, like truly taking my trauma and nursing it and cradling it and working at that healing journey for real, talking to that inner baby in me. It is, it's so hard to live in that and then get up every day and keep moving. So what made you want to embark on this journey for yourself before you even got to sharing it with anybody else? What brought you here?
Yeah, back in it would have been 2018 and 2019, I went through a really, really tough time. I got involved with a business partner. Before I knew it, it stole everything. I mean, I had nothing left, right? I have two little kids at the time, married. We had moved from Indiana away from family down to Florida. I have no money left. Credit was ruined. So I couldn't buy a house. And I'm questioning and asking myself, like, what do I do? Because everything up until that point had been rooted in what I've accomplished and what I've accumulated. So now I'm questioning, who am I? I don't even know who I am anymore because I don't have these things anymore. To the point where I question, do I even really want to do this thing called life anymore? And I never will forget, I used to go and sit out in the woods and really just cry and just sit there by myself because I was so ashamed because I feel like I let my family down and I let myself down. And I would just start to ask myself these questions of like, what are you afraid of? Why do you feel so insecure? What are you ashamed of right now? And I just started to self-contemplate really. And through this self-contemplation, I started to better understand why I was the way I was feeling. Why am I processing this the way I am? And with a lot of people, unfortunately, we don't get taught in the school system how to know ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We can tell everybody what's going on with Kendrick Lamar and Drake and all that beef going on, but we don't know what's going on within us.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is really how it started with me. I call it a sacred wound. This sacred wound was really what forced me to start figuring out, why am I the way I am? And I started to see it was linked back to things in my past,
Right.
back in that inner child, as you would say.
Mm-hmm. Wow. One of the things, and I'm a huge proponent of therapy and the healing journey, whatever that looks like, respective to the person. I think
Sure.
people have a right to decide what that healing journey looks like for yourself. And not everything works for everyone. But I think one thing is universal is that healing is scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's just this profound fear that makes people afraid to heal. And by and large, I think a large portion of that is just what you were talking about, is the ability to sit alone with self. When the silence gets loud and nobody hears you screaming, how did you get past that point?
Yeah, I think this is the athlete mind that I have. You know, it's like I liken it to if you're working out. If you're working out and it gets really uncomfortable and it hurts and it's painful, through sports, I've been conditioned to understand that this is when growth is taking place. So I just keep pushing forward. Well, it's almost like subconsciously, I knew this with going into those dark places within myself. I knew that if I could keep going and become comfortable being uncomfortable, I was somehow going to make growth. And I started to notice how I would feel. I would start to read books that I had already read. I would start to see life just a little bit differently. And I realized it wasn't because the book was changing, it was because I was changing. So then I started to put two and two together. Like the more that I go back and sit with myself and heal these wounds, the more of myself that I actually see. And I'm not seeing this distorted perspective of someone who's not enough, somebody who's incapable. And I started to kind of, let's just say the athlete's mind, you see, you almost fall in love with the process of it. And it just became just a way of life. And now this is where I am now, helping other people.
I think there's such a high level of profundity there, for a lot of reasons. You are an athlete, and there's an athletic mentality, but with the athletic mentality also comes almost a toxicity if you allow it to.
Yeah.
And you're a Black man. And as a Black man, there is a lack of provision and permission to be vulnerable, to actually do something other than be angry.
Right.
Who taught you? You go, you sit in the rooms, but in the woods, but who taught you what fear was and how to express it outside of anger, and anxiety outside of anger, and helpless and hopelessness outside of anger, that you even wanted to get to the point that it was okay for you not only to be this and do this, but then to say it out loud?
Yeah, no, you're right. Growing up in the sports world, and like you said, as a Black man, like we don't show our feelings. Oh, don't you do that? You're weak. You're soft.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fortunate enough growing up. Now looking at it, I had two parents that were uh, emotionally intelligent enough to provide a space that if I needed to express myself, I could.
Mm-hmm.
If they needed to express themselves, if they needed to cry, they could.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that helped with my emotional intelligence as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
But I honestly, Kimberly, I had hit rock bottom. I had nowhere to go but up. At that point, I didn't care what anyone thought about me because I was in such a low space that it was almost like I just surrendered and was like, you know what? If somebody thinks I'm this or that, I really don't care because I have nowhere to go but up.
Yeah. One of the things that I think human beings do a lot, especially those who have experienced high levels of trauma, hit rock bottom, like you describe it, is we wait to be angry. We wait to be sad. We prepare ourselves to be in a negative space. We're always waiting for that other shoot a drop.
Mm.
And I think it goes back to that self-talk, that unworthiness, like life can't be good. How
Mm.
did you get out of that negative feeling and waiting for the negative and then repurposing even the things that are not going as well as you might like them to be?
Yeah, I mean, I was at the lowest of the low. I'm talking about like waking up every morning just like miserable, and I this thought, this feeling, like this voice came to me. It was like, change the way you look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Now I've heard the word perception. I've heard the word of perspective, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but it had never resonated like it did when that thought came to mind of change the way you look at it,
Mm-hmm.
change your perspective of it. You can either, the old adage, we can look at life as the glass being half empty or half full. That's a choice that we all have. And what I didn't realize was that I've always had that power, and everybody always has that power. So when you start understanding your circumstances aren't really bad or good, it's your perspective of it that you're experiencing it. We're experiencing, and we all had the ability to choose how we perceived it. So
Mm-hmm.
that's really when things changed. When I realized I could shift my perspective of the situation, and I would experience it differently. So I started to ask myself, knowing what I know now, if I could replay everything, what would I do differently?
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote the answer down. And when I
Mm-hmm.
wrote down the answer, that was the information that was needed for me to continue on this journey in life, because at some point it probably was going to happen again. And now I had the answer to when the test came. And, this is kind of now how I live my life,
Mm-hmm.
consciously choosing how I perceive it so I can choose how I experience it.
Mm-hmm. What do you say and what do you do? I talk to a lot of people who struggle to heal without the apology that they feel they deserve.
Hmm.
The idea of I'm moving forward without closure. People use that word closure. I don't know why someone else is responsible for your closure, but the closure, and I didn't get the apology, or I'm healing myself from something that I didn't do to myself.
Hmm.
How do you guide that person to bring it back to their center?
Yeah, and this is where it's sometimes challenging. It's hard to hear, but
Mm-hmm.
there has to be a supreme level of accountability, right? So even for me, and sometimes it's hard for my wife to hear this when we have these conversations, but I tell her, like, that business partner didn't do anything to us. That's not what we're experiencing. We're experiencing our perspective of it. How many times have you ever had something negative happen, and then you see later down the line that negative thing actually ended up being a blessing? The situation didn't change. Your awareness expanded, so you had a different perspective of it. So for people who it's hard to get closure, that means we haven't gotten what we needed from that situation. So I help people going back to their trauma. When you start realizing as a child, we don't have the mental faculties to be able to provide for ourselves emotionally, mentally, what we need. So we depend on caretakers, whether it's parents, whether it's pastors, coaches, whoever. We depend on someone else to provide that for us until we're old enough to provide it for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why we have to go back and reparent ourselves, because nobody else knew what you needed better than you. You knew what you needed as a child. You knew that what you needed to be told by mom. You knew what you needed to hear from dad. But really, those were placeholders until you could give it to yourself. So something that has helped me immensely, going back to those child versions of myself and writing letters to him and telling him exactly what I know he needed to hear. And this is how you achieve closure. And you start to see it wasn't actually the person who I wanted closure from. It was my own acceptance, self-acceptance that I was seeking. And they were just a placeholder.
That's deep. I'm gonna have to go a little bit further with you there. It's deep because I could hear my audience saying right now, but I was a child. but
Sure.
I was a child. You
Sure.
know, we can't raise ourselves. How was I supposed to treat me differently? So
Mm.
what do you do when you reach that opposition? Because I know you speak to a lot of people,
Yeah.
and like in my head I can hear it. How do I do that?
Yeah. So we have to realize that even though, let's just say you're 40 years old, physically you're 40,
Mm-hmm.
but every trauma, every subconscious imprint that happened from the day you were born got stored into your psyche. So even though physically you're 40, emotionally you may have parts of you that are 14, 10, 11, and they don't come up until someone triggers them.
Mm-hmm.
This is why we had to go back and reparent, because let's just say dad left home when you were 5 years old and you couldn't quite process everything, but you knew that you didn't have a father who cared for you enough to stay.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel like you're less than. You feel like you're unworthy. So now here you are at 40 years old trying to go get a job or trying to start a business that really, that 5 or 6 year old inside doesn't feel like it's worthy of even achieving that. But the 40-year-old does. That's why we have to lend the awareness and understanding of the 40-year-old present day back to that 5 or 6 year old and tell that 5 or 6 year old, hey, you're enough. I got you. I'll protect you. And this is you sitting with yourself. This is what the word compassion means.
Mm-hmm.
Compassion comes from the Latin root compati, which means to suffer with. We have to go back and sit with the parts of ourselves who were children and didn't understand. We lend our awareness present day to the versions of us in the past. And this is how we rectify and heal the past so we can change who we are in the present, which ultimately will change what our future looks like.
Parts. So you use the word parts, and
Yeah.
we all have parts, right? There's all
Sure.
all different kinds of parts, and it wasn't an awareness that I always had. I learned the concept in therapy myself, um, about the different parts of you.
Mhm.
Um, how do you reconcile when a protective part starts to surface? What do you do? What do you
Yeah.
recommend others do?
Yeah. So the first thing is to have an awareness as to what's going on. So, like, I'm super aware of what I'm feeling from moment to moment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't wait for it to boil over in its anger. I can feel like, okay, there's fear right now, and it doesn't have to get to anger. Number
Mm-hmm.
two, acceptance, saying this is what it is right now. Don't deny that this is what I'm feeling. I have to accept that this is happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
The next stage of it is accountability. I have to be accountable enough to say, this is my perspective of this situation right now. Because if I go and ask her who doesn't know the situation, she would not be feeling the same thing that I'm feeling right now. So this is on me right now. If I'm creating this, I also have that same power on the opposite end to destroy it. And
Mm-hmm.
now we can start to bring awareness to why. This is when we start self-contemplation. We start asking ourselves, really, what's bothering you? As if you were speaking to a child. I talk to myself all the time. I journal. I write letters to myself. What is it that's bothering you, D? What is it? Tell me. And I'll write down, I feel scared. I feel alone. I feel like I'm not safe. When we start understanding that those parts of us that maybe endured trauma are trapped in darkness,
Mm-hmm.
the only way to combat darkness is through light. Light is your awareness. The more awareness you have of those versions of yourself, the less darkness can exist. And now we can start to integrate them into our present day and start to become what we refer to as being whole.
Mm-hmm. So all of this sounds great, DG. Like I'm like, yeah, I could do this in my 13 by 13 bedroom in here. You know, I listen, I can straight master this. Kimberly can be self-aware, I can journal, I can have conversations with myself. It's all good. But the world don't live like we live, right?
Right. Sure.
So what do you do when you're facing those who are not as self-aware?
Hmm.
How do you navigate this world in
Yeah.
2024 and keep yourself as whole as possible?
Yeah, I know for me, I have to realize that every soul, every human being on this in this world is on its own journey, has its own traumas, its own past experiences that has shaped its own perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So no one's going to have the same perspective of me
Mm-hmm.
as me. No one's going to have the same perspective of a situation. That's why we get 10 people to read a book, and every single one of them will have a different experience reading the same words, because the
Mm-hmm.
past experiences are what's shaping our perspective. So now I'm not looking at people from a place of judgment. I'm looking at them trying to understand why they have the perspective that they have. See, when we start understanding how the mind works, the ego creates separation. So we'll disagree or we'll agree with somebody. My perspective was we were never supposed to agree or disagree. We were supposed to understand. Why do you feel that way about this? Why do I feel this way? And now what ends up happening is we're not going to sit here and bicker and fight about it. We're going to seek to understand why and see if we can fill in the gaps to see if the other person can see, here's why I feel this way. So it takes patience, right? It takes, obviously, 2024, so at times the world feels more disconnected than ever, but I just have to remind myself that every soul is on its own journey, and I can't look at where I'm at and judge somebody else. My job is to see, well, wonder what shaped their experiences, their perspective, for them to be able to look at life this way. And it just allows you to be a lot more compassionate, a lot more patient with people.
How did your inner circle, how did your friends and family, how did that change?
Mm.
Did it change
Yeah.
as you went on this journey? What did that look like?
Yeah, it definitely evolved. I would say it changed. Those who didn't resonate anymore, they just kind of fell off. And I started to realize how many relationships that I had subconsciously depended on their validation and approval of me to make me be enough. I was using them to give myself permission on how to view myself. So once I started to see myself first and go back and heal these parts of the wounds, these people in my life that sometimes we refer to as friends, they were no longer needed because I was able to give myself now what I knew I needed. So, that anytime that you work on yourself, anytime you get to understand yourself, there's going to be a transformation that takes place. I always use the analogy of the caterpillar to a butterfly. People will remember you as a caterpillar, but you see yourself as a butterfly now. You naturally are not going to want to be around someone who still identifies you as a caterpillar. I'm not a caterpillar anymore. I'm a butterfly. And at times it was challenging with family and, close friends, but you get to a point in life where you realize that that's okay. That's their perspective of you. I don't have to make their perspective of me anymore. I don't have to do that. I can form my own perspective of me. And it allows me to be more patient and, like I said, not live from a place of separation.
How do you protect your peace? There's some people who, like you said, they fall off, you shed those people, you evolve, the relationships evolve. Um, but then there's some people who kind of get grandfathered in, right? Like there's people who
That's a good way to put it.
they get grandfathered in. We can't do anything about them. They're there. We know they're there, Thanksgiving, Christmas, or what have you. You show up and inevitably they're there. And now I have to protect my peace. I have to guard myself from being triggered and the resurfacing.
Sure.
In what ways and how would you tell our community to protect themselves?
Yeah, we got to be able to put boundaries up, right? I have to also be aware of where I put my attention, right? So like I've had to, I guess you can say, cut people out of my life. And it wasn't necessarily me having a conversation with them. It was me not devoting energy to them anymore. So maybe you get a call, you get a text message. Nope, I'm not answering that. I'm not even going to give energy to it because I know what's going to happen and I know where this is going. And if it's costing my peace, it's too expensive. I can't give you energy anymore. We don't resonate. So a lot of times what's hard for especially in our community is if you look at everything in this physical world, there's always something evolving. Nothing stays the same. But for some reason, we think that we're supposed to stay the same. And we've become accustomed to, oh, I'm supposed to keep the same friends and have the same people around me. If you grow and you continue to evolve, not everything is going to resonate. Not everything is going to, your palate changes, with food. Like I don't eat the same things I did when I was 15 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Allow yourself the space to be able to say, like, you know what? I'm in my growth season right now. And this right now doesn't resonate because that was my caterpillar life, but now I'm a butterfly. And there's nothing wrong with caterpillars because I too once was a caterpillar.
Mm-hmm.
But I enjoy the butterfly life now, and this is what I want to live.
But how dare you? Why are you
That's
not ride or die? You know what?
yeah, yeah,
10
sure.
toes down, right? Like, how dare
Yeah.
you?
Yeah. I mean, and you know what? If that's how you feel, that's okay too. That's your perspective. This is just my perspective. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying you're wrong.
Mm,
I, though, am choosing how I would like to experience my life. And this is how I want to choose it. This is what I want to do. So I've just, and look, if someone acts like that, look, and you're not getting, it's further letting you know that we just don't resonate. If you can't see what I'm trying to do here, it has no offense to you. Nothing, has nothing to do with you. I just want to continue to grow. And these are the conversations that I had to have. It's not you. It's not you. It's me. I'm evolving. I'm changing. So obviously easier said than done,
mm.
but give yourself permission to grow and
Right.
everything that comes with that.
What do you do with the waste? And I'll explain what I mean by that. Snakes grow and shed their skin. Caterpillars cocoon and become butterflies. What do you do with the waste from your growth? How do you dispose of it?
I like to hold on to my waist. I
Mm,
like to hold on to it because it allows me to invoke this energy that we call gratitude, right? Because a lot of times in life, we look at how far we have to go and we
mm,
never look at how far we've come. So this
mm,
is why I'm proud of my past. I'm proud of these things that I've endured because I can look at where I'm at now and say, wow, look at what you've done. Look what you've overcome to be able to see yourself when you look in the mirror as you do now. You remember when you had that skin and you were that size, but now look at you. So I live under the perspective that nothing in life is wasted and everything is needed. So when I look at that skin that seems like, oh no, why, well, that was a bad part of life or that relationship. No, no, no. That too served in me becoming who I am today. And while I'm not done, I'm not where I want to be.
mm.
This matters and where I'm going.
How do you recognize the moment? I know
Mm,
I hear you. Um, and there's always something to be sought. There's always a higher plane to get to.
mm,
But how do you show gratitude to the moment? How do you stop long enough to continue to to feel it,
mm.
to not become numb?
Yeah, yeah. I've had to become intentional uh, every day, every single day. I have a little chair by my bed. I close the door and I take no less than 15 minutes. And I
Mm,
just sit there and I just stare out of the window. I
mm,
just stare at the window and I take time for stillness, for presence. I'm not
mm,
thinking about anything. I'm just watching this tree across the street sway in the wind, or if it's raining, I'm watching the rain on the windowsill. I'm intentionally grounding and forcing myself to be in the moment because I
mm,
know once I step outside the house, life is going to take me and do what it needs to do and start lifing.
mhm,
But by being intentional with it and setting this as the pillar for the way I do my day, now I have something to come back to when life starts to get overwhelming
mm,
because I've already started my foundation. It's just like when you shoot a basketball, right? I don't start at the 3 point line, I start in close. So then even when I start missing from far, I'll know where I can always return to so I can get an easy bucket.
mm,
So this is something that has helped me immensely. And I always tell everybody, like, have a routine for yourself. You call it self-care, whatever you want to call it, like some
mm,
type of mental self-care every single day. Be intentional with your mind, with your thoughts, and nourish it. Give it what it needs. So I have to do these things every day just so I can keep my head above the water, because the world has programmed you to, like, I mean, it'd take you way down to the bottom. So yeah, this is something that's helped me immensely.
Yeah. Says the man who sunk the 4-point bucket.
Yes. Gosh, I forgot all about that.
Yes, says the man who piloted the 4-point bucket,
Wow, I
but
forgot
come
all
back
about
in
that.
close to where
Yep.
you know you will win from. I think that in and of itself is a whole word. You don't live life by yourself. You have 2 children, you have a wife.
Yep.
How do you create space in the relationship to encourage, to nurture yourself, the relationship, and the children?
This is something interesting with marriage. You know, I've been married. We're going on 13 years this August, and we've been together for almost 17 years. But I'd say really 2019, when we went through this tough time, I started to realize how important it was for this couple that's comprised of these 2 people, how important it is for each person to go on their journey and heal their wounds and understand why they are the way they are. And I used to look at us as one couple. No, we're 2 separate things that came together. So my wife has been unbelievable, and we've really fostered a space to give each other space, and whatever it looks like for us to continue to work on ourselves, whether it's going to a retreat or whether it's doing therapy or whatever you need to do, so that way you can better understand yourself. I'm in full support of it. And now what's ended up happening is it's helped me become a better father, a better husband. I look at my children completely differently than I did a year ago, because I started to realize that my children are really just versions of me when I was at that age. So I can start looking at my children and how I treat them based on really what's going on within me at the ages of 11, at the ages of 9. So it's really, you know, we're a family about self-improvement. And, you know, I have my son has a journal. My daughter, she has a journal, constantly writing out how they feel. So that way, when they endure their sacred wounds at some point, whether I'll be here or not, they will have the tools of knowing how to work through it.
Adultification. We talk a lot about it. One, how do you avoid it with your children? And how do you avoid the cliche parenting that is so prevalent in Black households?
So you mean adultification in the sense of like treating our children as if they're, yeah. So this is something that I've had to work through and realize that I can give you the tools and I can put boundaries up, but ultimately you're going to have to walk this path. You're going to have the one to figure out life. I'll show you and tell you what to do. I tell my kids, and sometimes this is hard for a lot of black parents to hear. I tell my kids, I can't tell you what to do. I can show you.
Right? You make me sit up in my chair. What you mean I can tell you what to do?
So here's what ends up happening. Here's understanding how the mind works. If I'm constantly telling my son, here's what you do. You better do this. You better do this. You better do this. Now what happens is, now when he becomes an adult, he can't think for himself because he's too worried about whether or not, what does dad think? What dad, do you think I did good? So I'm working through my wounds to help him. So I say, look, I'll tell you what I think you should do, but ultimately you're the one who makes the choice. So now what I'm doing is I'm empowering him to know that he always has a choice on which way he chooses. And I tell him all the time, look, you can make that choice if you want to. Life may be a little bit harder, but you still have the choice. You have to understand that you have the choice in which way you go and how you perceive something. So with my children and with all children, I believe, my perspective, it's allow them to be children, because nature is going to help them to become adults. But I give you an example: cell phone. My son doesn't have a cell phone. He's the only one in 5th grade. He's the only one on his basketball team who does not have a cell phone, because I look at him cognitively, emotionally, knowing a cell phone and what's on there. I don't know if you're ready for it yet. And just trying to be aware of being balanced and saying, hey, you got to make the choice. I can guide you, but you ultimately have to make the choice. But then also realizing sometimes his dad's got to step in and say, no, this isn't it. No, this is what's going on, and that's the end of it. So parenting is definitely I don't know if you ever really fully get it right, but they help you to learn more about yourself for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I shared with you before we started, my oldest is 30 and my youngest is almost 18. And I don't know, I've long since probably stopped saying right and wrong. Um, I measure myself by whether or not every day I've done my best. And even if, that 100% looked like yesterday's 50%, if I've done my best, then that's how I choose to measure myself. So I don't think I tend to believe that every single parent, most parents just want the best for their children and want to see them succeed. But we do have a question here that I want to read off. It says, how do you fix a parent-child relationship that is broken or a teen that is out of control due to us as parents making mistakes?
So I would first understand that a mistake is just we didn't have enough information when it was time to make a choice. Right. So I'm not looking at a mistake as something negative. I just didn't have enough information when it was time for me to choose on what to do. I have to first get that information. I have to first ask myself, okay, if I could go back, what would I do differently? That's number one. Number two, I can't move into the energy of guilt, right? Hindsight is always going to be 2020. It's easy to look at the awareness that you have now and look back and say, oh my gosh, why didn't I do that? That was my fault. I messed up. When you start realizing that you're doing the best that you can from the level of awareness of where you are at, now you just created space for grace. So we don't have to keep this perpetual cycle of beating ourselves up. And now that we're not living in the energy of guilt, we naturally are going to have more awareness. So sitting down with your child, I ask my 11-year-old all the time, what do you think I can do differently to help you in your life? And I make sure I tell them. It doesn't mean I'm going to do it. I just want to hear from your perspective. What is it you feel like? Oh wow, I never thought about that, man. Okay, that's what you need. That's what you need. Okay, great. Okay, we were at a basketball tournament a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him. I said, "What do you need me to do?" And he said, "Well, you always talk to me about being accountable. When I am accountable, can you just say, okay, good job, instead of like saying, oh, well, yeah, I know that's what you're supposed to be doing." And I was like, wow, you're right. Okay, I'll do that. So I think number one, especially in the Black community, we need to start understanding that, like, I know growing up, God was here, parents were here. We need to start letting our children realize that we're humans. We're humans. Like, I go through the same thing, or I have gone through the same thing that you're dealing with right now. There will be times where I will not get it right. Can I have enough self-awareness, enough compassion for myself to say, hey, look, I made some mistakes based off of some unaware things that were going on within my life. But now the awareness that I have now, I promise I'll do better. If I'm not, can we create a space where you can come to me and say, hey, mom, what are you doing? We talked about this. And now we're not coming from this hierarchy of I'm the parent and you better do what I say. Both are helping each other to grow.
Yeah. I think having the ability to apologize to your children,
It's huge.
having the ability to be accountable, even in your ignorance, right? Like, I didn't know better. I did the best that I could, but I am sorry this hurt you. I'm sorry that what I said or didn't serve you in that moment. And being able to leave that, and then to your point, DG, acknowledge that the rest of the way is actually the kids' job, right? Like, you can give apologies, but accepting them is something different.
Yeah, right.
So that's my 2 cents on that.
Oh, that's good.
How do you deal? We're Moms of Black Boys United, right? So this is the new talk, and this is a new talk, right? We're talking about healing ourselves on the inside, and um, but you have a Black son,
Yeah.
and no matter how evolved you are and your home is, society is still society. How do you prepare him for dealing with the ignorance that he may encounter and how that might put him off his game?
Yeah. So, he's 11 years old in fifth grade and he's already dealing with, racism and racial slurs. I told you before we hopped on, I had to go have a conversation with the teachers and the principal. Principal was supposed to show up, but he didn't. But my son understands that life is happening from the inside out. My daughter understands that life is happening from the inside out, meaning his peace is on the inside. His perspective is on the inside. His self-belief, his self-worth is on the inside. If it's on the inside, nothing on the outside can get to it unless he gives it the power to. He allows it in. So this is the way I was raised with my mother and my father. Supreme accountability. My son knows. We don't say, well, he did that. No, he didn't do anything to you. There may have been an act that happened, but that wasn't the situation. That's not what you're experiencing. You're experiencing your perspective. So I just, with my son specifically, because he is a Black man, I tell him the most important perspective of himself will be his own.
Right.
It doesn't matter what someone else thinks about him. It doesn't matter what someone calls you. It doesn't matter how someone sees you. What matters is how you see yourself. And I remember my mother doing this with me when I was 4 or 5, 6 years old. She used to point to my heart and say, it doesn't matter what anyone else believes about you. It matters what you believe about yourself. So my children know, or they're learning at least, that everybody's going to have something to say about you. Everybody's going to have a perspective about you, whether it's your skin color, whether it's what you believe, whatever it is. But none of them trumped what you believed about yourself.
How do you affirm them?
Yeah, I asked them what it is they need to hear. My daughter, she's like, I like to know that I'm creative, and she's super right brain, super creative, and my job is to affirm what it is they know they need to hear. My job, I don't, it's the point of telling my daughter that she's something, but she doesn't believe that she's that. But what if she sees herself as being creative and smart and fun? And I affirm her of those things. Now, my voice, because that's what's going to play in her head when she's an adult, will be in alignment with how she sees herself. So I ask my kids, how do you want to be known? How do you want to be seen? And that subconsciously is them saying how they want to see themselves. And now I have to affirm that at the right times.
Yeah, I tell people, don't treat me how you want to be treated. Treat me how I want to be treated. You
That's good.
know,
Yeah.
When I came to the realization that I didn't enjoy being treated the way you wanted to be treated. And I'm super like, pay attention. If your wallet's raggedy, let me go get you. And like, you don't even have to ask for these things, right? But I would struggle with people, not even just romantic partners, but just people who didn't pay attention to me in that way, you know. So I had to learn to start saying, no, don't treat me how you want to be treated. Let me do that. Treat me how I want to be treated. How do you teach? How did you teach yourself to advocate for that for yourself? And then how do you then teach your children to do that?
I had to first see enough of myself.
Mm.
And I think that's probably the first thing is we get taught to see everyone and everything before we see ourselves. We get taught to put everyone and everything before ourselves. So now, if I see myself, now I understand myself, and now I know myself. I know what I need. I know that I need to be safe. I know that I need to know that I'm enough. I need to know that I have enough. So now that I know that, I can affirm myself of that. But if I don't know, I won't affirm myself. I got to a stage where my kids used to see me in the mirror, and I used to write stuff on the mirror. I would write my affirmations, and these affirmations were all affirmations that I needed to hear as a child.
Mm.
And I was telling this child inside of me that you're enough. You're
Mm.
enough just as you are. It doesn't matter how many points you score. It doesn't matter where you play at. It doesn't matter. You're enough just as you are. And I accept you as you are.
Mm.
It seems like it's little, but those went so far because that's what this little boy wanted to say, who had moved from, I mean, we moved every 3 years. So I'm constantly trying to like fit in. I'm trying to fit in. Hey, do I fit in the playground? Do I fit in school? But subconsciously, it creates a wound that I'm not enough as I am. I
Mm.
have to do or be something else for you to accept me. So find out what it is that you needed to hear growing up, and that's what you affirm. That's who you affirm. You're affirming the child inside of you.
Yeah. So tell us about plant medicine.
Yeah, it's it has been what do you want to say? It has helped me immensely to get to levels within myself that not that I couldn't have gotten there. It probably just would have taken a little bit longer,
Okay.
right? Um, there's in the United States there's a stigma around plant medicine because it's unfairly been lumped into the same category as psychedelics, but the reality of it is
Mm.
it's the plant from one tree and the root from another, where I'm using ayahuasca as an example. When you put these two together, it allows you to essentially move your ego out of the way for 4 to 5 hours, and you get to actually experience that which you actually are. It's almost like watching a magician and you see how they did the magic trick. Once you see how they do the magic trick, you never fall for the illusion anymore. And that's it's been profound on my healing journey. I'm the African American culture doesn't you don't hear much about it. You hear about self improvement and healing. We don't really go into that world. But I'm
Mm.
starting to see how powerful it is, which is why I started throwing retreats to start helping people, to show them the tools and the modalities and give them their power back so they can go back into their community and start healing from the inside out and healing their home and showing their children, showing their friends of how they can understand themselves. But plant medicine has been um, a great resource in me being able to do this.
And you spoke about your retreats. Plant medicine retreats are not the only kind of retreats that you hold. Tell us a little bit
Yeah.
more about some of those other kinds of retreats that you do.
Yeah, so I have another retreat coming up here in September. That's in the Grand Canyon, and we essentially kind of go out in nature and we talk about being quiet, being still, being present. We're away from distractions, and I go out there, and for 3 days, really, it's about us reconnecting with those parts of ourselves that we've left behind. See, we
Mm.
don't realize that at some point we abandoned those wounds and we left so we
Mm.
could start becoming an adult, and we just kept sweeping things under the rug.
Mm.
So that retreat is centered around us reconnecting with the real part of us, the part of us, not the facade with the mask that we put on that we have to work and our spouses, the real part of us. So I enjoy my retreats. I get to connect with people on a different level. It's 3 or 4 days of me really getting to know people and help them, and I'm looking forward to all of them here in 2024 and 2025.
So I only have a couple questions left.
Okay.
First one is, what do you say to the person who says they don't have time to heal? I don't have time to cry. I don't have time to heal. I live in a capitalist society and I have to go, or I don't get. What do you say to that person?
If somebody said they're going to give you $10 million if you make time, I bet you'd figure out a way to make time. It's just a belief that we have. So if I believe that I don't have any time, then I won't have any time. But if I made a commitment to myself and a non-negotiable contract that said, here within the next 12 months, I'm going to make time, even if it's only 10 minutes a day, you'll figure out a way to make time. The old adage, we all have 24 hours. What you do with it is your choice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I know for me initially on this journey, there was things that I had to sacrifice. I had to sacrifice. So maybe I couldn't go and do this and go do that. So I could make time for me to work on myself. Maybe instead of turning on the TV, I picked up a book.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe instead of, going to go play basketball at the gym, I said, you know what, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to learn how to meditate.
Mm-hmm.
So we all have time. We all have the same amount of time. It's just, what are you doing with it? What are you prioritizing? And that's
Mm-hmm.
probably the bigger question that we need to ask.
Yeah, we just recently someone said to me, you have to pay yourself. And of course, I've heard that, 1,001 times, but we have to pay ourselves in health, and we have to pay ourselves in mindset, and we have to pay ourselves in taking care of not just our bodies, but in our minds. You have to remember to do that. And I often have to remind myself of that too.
Yeah.
My last question before, I let you kind of just take the mic and give, your 3-minute spiel on how we can truly begin the journey to shifting our mindset and healing that trauma is, how did you change the dream that you were chasing, and how would you recommend someone else do it?
How did I change the dream? Like, um, like, do you mean like from when I was a kid up to now, or like as an adult? Would you say?
As an adult,
Yeah.
when you decided, I did this journey for myself,
Mm.
did you imagine that you would be DG mindset
Mm.
before that day in the woods?
Can I be honest with you?
Of course. And
Yeah, I
everyone
did.
watching.
Yeah, I did. I did. I knew. I've always been, ever since I was a kid. Sometimes it gets me in trouble, but I have this vivid imagination that I can do anything. I can be anything.
Mm,
I've always had that. I remember when I was a little kid, I used to take the the plastic bags, and put them on my shoulders and jump off the porch and pretend I was flying. And you couldn't tell me that I wasn't flying. I've always kept this childlike imagination that I can do anything. If you give me enough time, I'll figure out a way to get it done. So once I hit rock bottom in 2018, 2019, and I started to understand really how the mind works and really learn and break it down, I started to see that the only limits that I had were my own beliefs. That
mm,
was it. There was nothing else. Nobody in my family played professional basketball. Nobody in my family even played basketball. I'm 6'2". My mom's 5'8". My dad's 5'7". My brother's 5'10".
mm,
Nobody in my family said, hey, here's how you do it. But I always knew I was going to do this. And I
mm,
started to study why. How did I do this? I started to reverse engineer. It was because you believed you could. No, you didn't believe you could. You knew you could.
mm,
So now I've realized all I have to do is to know that this is a possibility.
mm,
So I can do that through seeing someone else who maybe looks like me and say, oh, wow, if he did it, I can do it. Or I could go back and sift through my life and find those parts of myself who maybe didn't feel like that this was possible. Maybe it was that little boy who didn't get picked on the basketball court when he was 8 years old and everybody said that he was terrible.
mm,
I have to go back and tell him, dude, you can do it. You can do it. And now that belief moves into knowing. So I feel like, honestly, Kimberly, I'm really just getting started. I don't think the world really truly, I always say, if you knew what I knew, we would have been having conversations. So
mm,
I feel like I'm in a space now where I just want to continue to tell people, as many people as I can, and give them their power back, and realize how powerful your mind is. It is the most powerful thing in this world. If you look at that house you're in, this podcast, the organization that you started, it first started with a thought, or what we call an idea. If you
mm,
wipe away that first thought, we don't have anything around us. So if we can build structures and houses and then in offices and podcasts, what if we consciously used our mind?
mm,
Imagine what you could do. And this is what I'm trying to spread to not only, the African American community, but humanity in general. It's us taking our own mind back. If you take that back, you'll see how powerful you really were.
Wow. So last thing,
Yep.
this is, let's say you're giving us the playbook. You're giving us the first three steps in getting off the merry-go-round.
Yeah.
Sometimes the hardest part, I know for me, getting to the gym is the hardest part is just getting there that first time.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we start?
Okay. That day when I told you I was out in the woods, I just asked myself these two questions. What are my biggest insecurities? What are my biggest fears? Fear is the only thing that stops a human being. Nothing else. It's fear. Okay. Fear of trying. And usually the fears are one of three things: the fear of not having enough, or what we call poverty consciousness, the fear of not doing enough. That's what we refer to as like accomplishment or achievement. But 99.9% of the time is going to come down to this one. It's the fear of not being enough. That's what we call unworthiness. That's what we call shame. We all struggle with it in some way, shape, or form. Now that I have an awareness of this is what my fears are, I have to now start plucking and sifting through to see, when do I remember feeling like this growing up? Specific examples. Let's just say you find it when you found out dad was leaving home. Okay. You remember feeling shame. You remember feeling like you were unworthy. You're not enough. Okay. Now that we have found that version of you, we have to go back and go through these 7 steps. I have to bring awareness to that's what it is. Number 2, I have to I have to accept that this is a part of my life. Number 3, I have to meet it with compassion, meaning I'm going to sit with it and cry. I'm going to suffer with it. Now that I've done that, I can move into stage 4, which is reparenting. That's when we write the letter. I tell this child everything that it needed to hear because I knew what it needed to hear. Now I can move into step 5, which is expression. I allow this child to speak. I allow this child to tell me, or tell that person, maybe tell dad who left, how it felt. Now that it can express itself, number 5, it moves into number 6, which is it can set boundaries. It won't get involved in relationships that continue to trigger and bring up these wounds, because now it can say, I'm not doing it. You're not going to talk to me that way. Nope, I'm not getting involved with it. And now that we do that, we naturally move into the last phase, which is stage 7, which is integration. Now I can start to become aware when things happen, and I can instantly give myself what I needed in that moment, and it doesn't have to ravel itself up. So I don't know if that was the simple way, but this is the 7 laws of healing your inner child, which will be a book that comes out here in September. So you guys have to
That
pick that
I
up.
mean, it's simple to say. I'm sure it's harder to do.
Sure.
Um, you have every day to start over. So I would add one thing that I personally struggle with, and I just said this to somebody yesterday, is setting time limits on myself, and then having an inability to break that and provide grace to me, right? To provide grace to myself. And so just knowing that I get to start over and try again every single day.
Yeah.
Just reminding myself of that. DG Mindset, y'all. You dropped the gems. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I look forward to seeing and hearing what comes next. Tell people how to find you, what's coming up, your website. Tell us all.
Yeah, no. First of all, thank you for having me on. Thank you for uh, what you're doing with your organization. It's so needed. And as the son of a Black woman and having a son of my own, I'm just eternally grateful for you even having me on. You can find me at dgmindset.com, DG Derick Grant, dgmindset.com, all social media, whether it's TikTok, Instagram, Threads, I think Facebook too. It's DG Mindset. I try to make it as simple as I can. Have some retreats coming up. Have retreats. Still have some slots left in September, the Grand Canyon, but we just released this past weekend our plant medicine healing retreats. in 2025. We're going 3 times in January, February, and March to Tulum, and um, they'll heal you. They will definitely help you on this journey of understanding who you are. So I just tell people sign up here before June 1, save 15%. And yeah, I always tell people send me a DM. Send me a DM on Instagram. I'm usually on there the most, not much, but the most. And I usually try to respond whenever I can. So
thank you. Thank you all for joining us. Tune in for our special town hall on Friday. We will be talking about artificial intelligence with our very own Delicia Hand. And then following that, we're going to have a special program on Mother's Day. Always a Mother. We'll be talking with one of our resident leaders, Kathy, who lost her son tragically, but reminds us that if you've carried a child in your womb, then you are always a mother. Follow us on Instagram, follow us on Facebook, tune into all of our programming. DG, again, thank you, thank you, thank you. I look forward to seeing you soon.
yes, thank you, Kimberly.